Better? Oh, that's way better. All right, good. Good thing you didn't hear any of the other stuff. I do want to talk a little bit about our brains, and the last talk was really awesome, by the way. But my brain moves, so I'm cooler. I feel like data. When we talk about innovation, right? Right, we could have like cooler user interfaces and stuff, but I feel like without data, we have nothing. And I feel like we've always had data. The difference between, before the last 10, 15 years and now is now we have the ability to harness data. And all of the nodes of your brain, like the last speaker was talking about, being able to capture that, right? How we're thinking, how we're feeling, what our emotions are, what do we think, all of that stuff. It's always existed. The data's always been there, but now we actually have a way to actually capture that data, right? There's a company out there called Spark Neuro. They're based in New York City. They can put a device on your head, and actually you'll sit and watch a movie, and instead of like having a census to figure out like whether you're interested or not, they can actually watch your brain and watch it light up, depending on your interest, depending on your emotion. Is there anybody here from Spark Neuro? It's an amazing little company, and what I want to talk about for the next 30 minutes is how we need to be able to think differently about data. And who here feels like they need data and they need current data in order to not only do your job, but basically live your life nowadays? Show of hands. Pretty much every hand. Who feels like they have the data they need at their fingertips to do their job all day, every day? 0 hands, right? So I call that opportunity, right? And we're going to talk about some of the opportunities that are happening this year. This is happening, it's so important now because, when I was, let's rewind a few years ago, innovation and currency of technologies were found at the workplace, right? And only big companies could afford to have really leading edge technology. Now, everybody has the leading edge technology in their phone, and then they get to work and they realize, why can't I just get my sales numbers for yesterday? Why is it a project to do that? It's ridiculous, right? And we have to make that change now, and that change is actually just starting. Technologies have been changing over the past decade, but now culture is starting to change. And I think that's what's going to be really different between the last decade and this decade, is culture is changing because if we look at the demographics of the people in the workplace, used to be mostly baby boomers, especially running businesses, mostly boomers, right? Boomers, they had to rely on their own knowledge and they had to rely on conventional wisdom because the technology didn't exist in their formative years and it didn't exist as they were going through their career. Now, everybody who is becoming the leaders of organizations were born with a phone in their hand. So when they go to a company and they can't get yesterday's sales right now, something is broken and they're not going to stand for it anymore, right? This says 93% of all millennials will have a phone. Anybody in the room not have a phone? I said, if everybody, if it would be hard to pick out if I said everybody with a phone, raise your hand, right? But if we can get information to like real anything, right? Like if I just ask like, actually I can't, I have no Wi-Fi. But I want to talk about, we want to get instantaneous response to the information about our company, about our business, about our customers, about our products. And the way we do it today, even with the most modern data engineering, data technologies in the world, on the cloud, right? we're still having to go find our sources, right? Get our data, put it into a proper organized environment so that we can do reporting. And then we build reports in order to interact with our data, right? It's kind of crazy, right? It takes too long. We shouldn't be doing this anymore. I think the basic architecture is still correct and still relevant, but the way we're going about it is just, it's archaic. And we're going to talk about the most disruptive things. I think this is probably the most disruptive thing of any organization, especially if the organization is more than 10, 15 years old. The nice thing about organizations younger than that is you don't have all the baggage, right, and all the tech debt from later years, from older years. So we want to talk about like how do we avoid all of that stuff. So I think there's going to be three major technologies that's going to be very prolific throughout the entire world. One is data spiders. So think about any startups in the room? Startups. So when you founded your company, first thing you do is you go buy a domain name, right? And then, so now you're on the internet. Probably within seconds, if not definitely minutes, and 100% guaranteed by the next morning, anybody else in a room searches for any content on your website, they're going to find it, right? They're going to find out who you are, what you do, all of the content, all of the metadata associated to your business on your website, right? Why can't we do that with our own internal data, right? Why can't every time we get a new data set in-house that we want to analyze to change our business or direct our business or affect our user experience, how come it's a project? How come it's not instantaneous like that? So I think we need to be able to create spiders that not only search the internet for domain names, but we also need to have spiders that will look within our enterprise, within our firewall, and look for any data sets that exist, whether it's in a database, a JSON file, whatever, and be able to capture everything about that data. The next innovation that's going to happen, that is happening, is once we have all of that information, now we need to have some machine learning and some AI to actually figure out how do you integrate all this data. So 15 years ago, I wrote a book called the ETL Toolkit. That's the best practices on how to extract, transform, and load data, right? Consolidate data to prepare it for analytics. Basically, what happens is we have human analysts that look at data coming from different places and try to assess how to join it all together, right? If a human can do that, what do? We basically do a physical look at it. We try to join it with some SQL, and if we lose data, we know it's a bad join, right? And we keep experimenting until we get it right. There's no reason why we can't automate that. There's no reason why as soon as a new piece of data enters your environment, you shouldn't be able to just have it integrated instantaneously, right? That's happening. And then the next part is interacting with your data. If we can go on our phone and ask basically whoever your chatbot of choice is, pretty much any piece of information we want about the general world, we still can't ask like what were our sales yesterday, right? So if we can do that, if we can enable that, do we ever actually even need a report? Do we need to have printed reports or visual reports if we can get every answer we want about our data just by asking, right? Generally what you do is you look at a dashboard and you look for the metric you want, and then you see whether it's good or not. If you could just ask what it is and get the answer, you probably never need to look at that dashboard again. So I think the most disruptive thing that's going to happen is that BI will change. ETL, the world of data analytics, will change. And the way we actually ingest data and analyze it is going to change. And this is not some kind of fantasy. Mark Ramsey, who is the R&D Chief Data and Analytics Officer at GlaxoSmithKline, he actually did exactly all of these things. So GSK actually has this footprint and these technologies in-house right now. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of these. So spiders, if you're interested in it, spiders, there's actually an open source solution out there that was created by this company called Modak Analytics. They call it the Kosh repository. They enable you to be able to stand up their repository for free and then be able to configure it so that it can wake up and go interrogate the data as the data is born within your environment. This is actually deployed at GSK. And then the bots is where we take all of that information and we have code that writes code, right? Which is not a new philosophy, not a new technology. We have code writing code for decades. But now we're having code that actually infers joins between data sets and can build your ETL pipelines automatically with very little, maybe not zero user intervention, but pretty close, right? A lot of what we do can be automated and will be automated. And then in order to really unify data, right? So coming up with rules like I'm getting customer data from my application, my user-facing application. I'm getting customer data from my ERP system. They're not exactly aligned. How do you unify it? Who trumps who? All those business rules. That, we spend so much time. Especially, I was speaking to some of the big banks here, so much time figuring out, doing like master data management strategies and MDM implementations and trying to figure all this out. This year and in the next few years, this will be the core advancement, I think, in the data world, in the technology world, in the enterprises all over the world. There needs to be a way to get your data faster. And we have the technology, and now we just need to have the innovation. Tamr is a product out there that does a pretty good job at this, not perfect, but it's pretty good. It will take the information, it'll go through all of the data, it'll actually detect data quality defects for you without having users actually look for it manually. And then the interaction, right? I do believe that reports will be something that we see in museums at some point. I don't believe that we need to have a predefined set of metrics shown to us in order to run our business. I believe that everything will be NLP. Anything will be either voice or text. It doesn't really matter. That leap isn't a stretch anymore like it used to be. And there's evidence already. How many in the room are Tableau users? A lot of you, probably half of you. Big concentration here, by the way. I don't know what about you guys over there. But yeah, they just came out with a thing called Ask Data, where it's an NLP-based system where you can just type in natural language questions and it'll answer with a visual response. Now this one is probably the most challenging, and it's what was talked about a lot this morning. So technology is actually pretty easy. You could tell a computer to do pretty much anything, and it's going to do it. You tell people to do things, and they just don't. And it's funny that a lot of the talks this morning were about the people part, and the people part we can't be ignored, right? When we talk about innovation, right, you could build the greatest car in the world unless you teach somebody how to drive it. They're never going to drive that car. It'll sit there idle. Right? So data literacy is something that can no longer be optional. Data literacy, if you're doing anything, if your organization decides that it wants to be driven by analytics of its data, you need to have the entire organization trained, and you need to change the culture of going from being conventionally wisdom-driven to being data analytics-driven. And it's not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen by build it and they will come. It has to be very intentional programs to handle the people, deal with their fears, deal with the psychology of change, right? Any change, right, is something in your life is going to end. And that's hard. Even if what it's going to be replaced by is better, still something in your life is going to end. And so you need to deal with that, right? It's almost like you need to go through the grieving process and get people through that process. And in the end, they'll be in a better place. But it's hard to imagine a better place when all you can focus on is what you're losing. And this is really, really important when it comes to data literacy. You actually need to evolve your culture as you evolve your technologies. In order to change anything, in order to manage anything, you need to be able to measure it first. Something that's happening this year, I guess it's not brand new. Data management maturity models is not a new concept, but having maturity models specifically to measure your analytics platform, your analytics abilities within an organization, the people part, the processes part, the platform part, the data part, right? Measuring, there's 8 different dimensions that are considered when you're measuring your analytics maturity. Each one of those should be measured, should be baselined, and come up with a roadmap on how to get from where you are today to where you want to be. These are readily available. Caserta offers it, our company, Gartner can do it. There's other organizations out there that can do it. It's very hard to do internally. You generally need an outside view that's completely unbiased to be able to do this type of measurement. Number 7 is being able, so we're talking about how valuable data is, right, within an organization. But there's really no methods out there that actually values it, right? You know, you can evaluate your business, right? But how do you evaluate the data within your business? So there's a guy named Doug Laney who came from the Gartner Group, who now works for Caserta. He wrote a book called Infonomics. We're not here to sell books, but if you're interested in it, Infonomics is a really good book, very detailed about how you can help your organization measure the value of your data. And there's a few different ways: intrinsic value, performance value, the cost value, performance value, and how to take the things that we know how to measure, like data governance capabilities, data quality capabilities, the ability to generate revenue. Take all of the things we know how to measure and actually quantify it, right? And this is a good approach if you're trying to justify new projects or new ways of doing business within your organization. Say, why do it? Because if you follow these methods, you can actually measure a quantifiable return on any investment that has to do with your data. Number 8, how many people are responsible for the user experience, the digital transformation of your business? How many people are responsible for the data within your business? How many people need both in order to be successful? So so most of the hands went up when I said, do you need both, right? And right now, you have a digital transformation officer, typically, or someone responsible for the digital experience. And then you may have a chief data officer, or somebody who's responsible for your data. Sometimes they align together in an organization where there's a hierarchy. Sometimes they're completely different with different initiatives. I do think in order for any of what I've talked about so far to be successful, we do need to there needs to be a convergence. These two officers need to be perfectly aligned. And they need to understand each other's needs The digital officer generally works focused purely on the user experience, but it needs data and analytics of the data in order to affect that experience, right? The chief data officer is typically responsible for governance, safety, security, and also generating revenue based on the data that it has. The two of them have very similar but somewhat disaligned, typically, goals. I think they need to really come together, and we're starting to see trends in the workplace where they are starting to come together. I think it'll become more obvious. Number 9, the cloud. Anybody here not on the cloud? Anybody here not going to raise their hand no matter what I say? Yeah. Anybody here on the cloud? Okay, there's a few of you that just don't know, I guess. What's interesting is that S&P 500, the biggest companies in the world, right? They're typically, on average, about 50, 60 years old. The oldest company on the S&P 500 is actually right across the river, Bank of New York Mellon. 232 years old that company is. To get these old companies to realize that their data is actually safer on the cloud than it is on-prem. That fear is starting to diminish. It is a battle that has been fought for the last couple of years, but I say luckily, but not lucky for anyone. All of the major data penetrations and data vulnerabilities that have happened, data breaches that have happened over the last couple of years were mostly on-prem solutions. They were not cloud solutions. So in order for all of the things that I'm talking about to work, the assumption is being made that your data is probably on the cloud. And then the last one, I think over the last couple of years, industry by industry has been leapfrogging each other. Financial services, media and entertainment. I think the year 2020 is all about healthcare innovation. We're really starting to see healthcare being kind of a surrender that everything needs to be decided by humans, and the only way to really save lives in a very significant way is to start recognizing that machine learning and artificial intelligence is the only way to scale and get the speed that you need in order to save lives when in a business where every second matters, right? This is an area of growth that we're seeing. We actually wrote a white paper on it. If you're interested, healthcare data driven, if you're interested. And that's basically it. I think everybody in the room, I think, prides themselves on being the change agent, be the disruptor. I think we're in an incredible time for business in general, going through changes that have not really been recognized before. And this is a shameless plug of my company that does a lot of the things that we talked about. If there's any questions at all, you could just reach me, very simple, joe@caserta.com. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. We've got time for one question.
Thank you. Super interesting to hear. And particularly your final note on the future of innovation being the next space. And I wonder, as someone who prides himself on having a job that is driven by data, but that I drive it, what do you see as the role for humans, particularly with, what we would say is like EQ, and how you would build a future filled with spiders and bots dealing with particularly questions of healthcare, but also just answering complicated questions that require EQ?
So the question is about EQ, and I'm going to make a lot of people unhappy, I think, but I think that these types of innovations are going to be mankind's biggest competitor. And I think competition of any kind is always a good thing. And I think it's going to force people to focus on their EQ because that's their differentiator. And right now, if I go into a department store and I go to customer service, the person behind the counter could not care less about my problem, right? I would so much rather have a robot behind the counter that can just handle the transaction for me, right? But if I had somebody who actually had some empathy and who cared and can actually see my problem and take care of it for me, then I would go to a human over a robot any day of the week, right? And I think it is going to drive, I think competition forces companies and forces people to figure out what are they really good at and make that their personal differentiator. And I think EQ is going to be that thing for humans. And it's going to make, I hope, that it'll make the customer experience, especially customer service experience, better for everyone.
Great, thank you.